wrapping up preview season with the Big Ten as we move ever so closely to the season. Still some big questions at quarterback and, the position battles going on there, especially at Ohio State, as of August 12th at the time of recording, have not heard who the starter is going to be there yet, although it is still assumed to be Julian Sayin. But regardless, without further ado, Happy Valley. Are we going to be happy this year? Is Penn State going to are we going to have success here? Are we going to finally beat some big teams, maybe win a conference title, dare I say a national title? I don't know. What did we do last year? Well, last season we played for the Big Ten title, obviously, lost to Oregon, made the playoff, and we beat Boise State and SMU. But we did lose to, I think, Notre Dame. So kind of the same tale. Made the playoff because of the 12 team, because of the expansion. Still didn't really beat any of the big dogs. Any team that we were not favored against, we did not win. We did not beat. But coming into this year, hopefully all of that is in the rearview mirror. Over/under is 10.5 to start the season. Expectations, what are they in Happy Valley? Well, title run, pretty simple. Conference championship, at least play for it. Make a run for the national championship. Pretty simple. We did that last year, though, and it still seems kind of stale there. It still feels, I don't want to, discount winning football games, playing in these games that Penn State plays in. That's never to be discounted. But it's a little, it's super nuanced whenever you get to this point. There's a lot of room to fall below 10 wins, which is where Penn State perennially seems to be. But there's a little bit, there's a few more rungs on the ladder that they want to climb there that they just haven't been able to yet. So obviously title run, obviously play for the conference championship, but we want to beat Oregon. We want to beat Ohio State, right? We want to win the conference title. We want to play for and win a national championship. And those are, some teams that they haven't been able to beat. But this year, Oregon, Ohio State, and Nebraska are your key games. Fairly light schedule for Penn State. You got, like I said, this is probably James Franklin's best team, dare I say. Drew Aller probably, how much farther will he progress? Can he reach another level? He's a pretty good quarterback there, but, it just feels like with the way the wide receivers have been playing there, maybe we need him to just reach another level or elevate those around him more. But regardless, should be a pretty good team. Brought in Jim Knowles from Ohio State at defensive coordinator, so they're taking the season very seriously there in Happy Valley, going all in. I would say that this is the top of their window. This is kind of their peak. If Penn State doesn't, I'm kind of in on Penn State this year. Hopefully I don't regret doing that. Like I said, kind of the peak of their window. If they don't strike this year, then I don't know if they're going to there under James Franklin. Regardless, a lot of expectations for me with Penn State this year, as there should be. But I'm going to go ahead and move out west. Don't want to spend too much time. I'm going to go over, some more stuff with Penn State on the prediction special this Thursday. But moving out west to USC, what is going on at Southern California? 7-6 last year, over under again this year, 7.5. Floor, 6-6, ceiling 10-2, pretty wide, margin, pretty wide variability of outcomes there. The expectation, we need to be a factor in the Big Ten if we're USC this year. We need to show serious progress on the defensive side of the ball. We need to show that we can be physical. We need to, push for the playoff. We just need to be that program that we expected to be under Lincoln Riley, and the kind of program that USC has, maybe not vintage USC, but, we know what the potential is there. We need to recapture some of that this season, show progress towards that. Key games are at Illinois, Michigan, at Notre Dame, at Nebraska, and at Oregon. So pretty tough schedule coming up for Lincoln Riley. Probably isn't on the hot seat, big buyout. Where would they go? A lot of, expenses that athletic departments are racking up now with rev share, so coaches are going to have longer leashes. Is the defense going to be improved? They improved slightly last year. Do they take, another step forward this year? They could, they should. We will hope that they do, but regression is also, something that can happen. Progress is not just automatic because you brought in, another guy. You're not just automatically going to take the next step. You've got to push every day for it. So it is possible we still see some regression there, but I'm in the boat of I'm not going to believe it till I see it with USC and the defense. The offense also kind of, sputtered, for lack of a better word, last season as compared to other Lincoln Riley quarterbacks and, seasons that they've had. So not only is defense faltering there, but the offense has started to slip as of last year too. So we need to see some major improvement at USC this year. That's really the overarching expectation and talking point around this program is we need to see major improvements on both sides of the ball, play more physical. How are we going to win these one possession games? It seems like we may have some kind of inherent problems in this coaching staff. Can we, shore that up and move past it this season? We're going to find out. I'm not so sure that we can, to be frank, but regardless. Looking back on last season, it's kind of funny. It's hard to, you don't really remember Michigan as having a bad year, but they did go 8-5. Obviously, finishing the year with beating Ohio State as like a 3-touchdown underdog and beating Alabama in the bowl game. Really, those wounds healed from that season. They healed pretty quick, and looking back, it feels like a pretty big success. The over-under coming into this year, shockingly high, in my opinion. Whenever I looked to see and, found it was 9.5. I guess that Vegas knows something we don't. They don't have a crazy hard schedule, but, they do have some good swing games on here. The expectation in at Michigan this year, show that you're building, want to keep beating Ohio State. You don't want to regress there and start losing to them, although it's perfectly likely and, reasonable, I guess I'll say, to do so. They're a really good team, but be a factor in the Big Ten. Like I said, beat your rival. Just continue showing progress that you're building. You've got Bryce Underwood coming in at quarterback as a true freshman who, true freshman quarterbacks in conferences that play pretty good defense like the Big Ten. Tamper your expectations this year. I'm not saying that he won't be a star, but, we just need to not put so much on him. That's just kind of across the board for true freshman quarterbacks. I'd say your floor is probably 8-4 because of the schedule, ceiling 10-2. Like I said, that over-under at 9.5 is kind of crazy to me. But key games, week 2 at Oklahoma. You also go to Nebraska. You go to USC. Get Washington and Ohio State at home. Quiet off season, relatively speaking. Just kind of a show me year for Jerome Moore. A lot of, just chaos with the Connor Stallion stuff still lingering. That's, one of the first things people think about whenever they think about Michigan at this point. So Jerome Moore is going to be suspended, I believe, for 3 games this year, although it's not going to be really any of their big ones. So just continue building. Show me, that you can develop Bryce Underwood. We spent a ton of money on this kid, so show us that he is the future like we all believe him to be, and I think things will be just fine at Michigan. But down at Ohio State, last year, congratulations, you were the national champion, obviously, but you still lost to Michigan. So kind of a golf clap for the championship. Not a super big celebration for the loss to your rival there, which does matter. Don't let them fool you. Over-under coming into the season is 10.5. Floor is probably around the 9-3 mark. Ceiling 11-1. What's the expectation? Obviously, beat Michigan. I wrote that in all caps. Beat Michigan, beat Michigan, beat Michigan. We are dying to beat Michigan. Make the Big Ten championship playoffs. As usual there, it's Ohio State. That's the expectation, but, probably in big, bold letters since we won a championship last year. I think that a lot of them will probably say, we just want to beat Michigan this year. Let's be honest. Key games. You got Texas on the schedule week 1, notably. You go to Washington. You got Penn State on the schedule, and you go to Michigan, of course. Biggest questions for Ohio State to me are how do they reload from last season? They're in the hundreds in returning production. Julian Sayin probably going to be the quarterback there, but that battle is still ongoing, and the longer it goes, you can look at that one of two ways. You can look at it in the positive light and say, wow, we've got two really good quarterbacks. They're not really separating. What a great, problem to have in one sense. Or you could look at it and say, wow, we've got two quarterbacks, and I'm not sure that either one of them are, capable of starting this season and taking us where we want to go. I think it's probably the former rather than the latter, but then again, you like to have someone named by this point, but let competition play out. It'll all sort itself out before the season starts. And obviously, do they beat Michigan? Like I said, maybe, maybe not. You got to go to their place this season, but how do you reload is the biggest question. Obviously, Ohio State recruits really well. Kind of something we're seeing throughout college football. I've hammered this home. I'll probably do a segment at some point, kind of summing up, how these changes should affect our expectations. But reloading is probably, even for the big dogs, is not going to be something that just happens, in the snap of of your fingers like it kind of used to. But how do they do it? Still, we'll find out week 1. Gonna touch on Illinois here for just a hot second. 10-3 last year, had a really good year. Over under coming into 25 is 8.5. I'd put your floor probably around 8-4, 7-5, ceiling back up at the 10 win, in the 10 win category. What's the expectation there? Be a factor in the Big Ten, push for the playoffs. Pretty simple. That's kind of the expectation for a lot of teams in the Big Ten, but Illinois is one of them. Your key games at Indiana, who you should beat. I'm not a believer in Indiana. USC, you got them at home. Ohio State, you got them at home. Washington and Wisconsin, you got them at home. So, not a murderer's row, but not an easy schedule either. Can you build on your success? It's not something that just happens. How will they handle being hunted? Kind of a common, fun talking point whenever, teams like Illinois, who aren't traditional, contenders, kind of pop. They kind of, one of the, things that works in their favor is that they're not expected to pop like Vanderbilt last year. Alabama's not going into Vanderbilt last year expecting them to be the team that they are, and then they end up walking out of there with a loss. So that's something that works in your favor one year, but the next season you don't necessarily have a target on your back, but no one's overlooking you, I'll say. So can you still reach that level of success while teams are not overlooking you? And I don't want to, got to give them credit. Obviously, whenever, they're a good team last year, everyone knows it. Not saying that they were super overlooked last season either. Got to credit the 10 wins that they got, but still, again, coming into the season, it's just kind of you're viewed through a different prism than, you would have been last year. So not too much more on Illinois. Pretty, basic there. They return a lot. Should be another good year, but they'll be fun to watch. Definitely going to be, a team. They're going to bite somebody this year, I think. So, but I'm not so sure that Nebraska can do that, but, not so sure they can't either. Nebraska last year, you went 7-6, made a bowl game. Was that the first time in like 10 years, I think? Over under this year is 7.5. Floor is probably around 6-6. Ceiling's 9-3. The expectation there is, Matt Rule money year, show us progress. Everything's kind of been building towards this season. Make a bowl game again. Show us, mini Patrick Mahomes, Dylan Raiola there. We want to see progress in him, obviously, but keep building. We hired Matt Rule, and this is kind of the year that we've been building towards. Like I said, key games: Cincinnati, Michigan, USC. You can go to Penn State, and you got Iowa. So you're gonna have your ups and downs there on the schedule. I think fans there want to believe in Matt Rule. Can Nebraska reach the promised land again? Can we get back to being kind of a, dare I say, blue blood, but a perennial contender where you're a part of the conversation, contending for your conference championship and playoff spots year in and year out. I don't think that it's that the sport has necessarily passed you by, but there is still probably some work to do there in that athletic department and on the football field to get back there. But I think this season could be kind of an early stride in that direction. Do want to kind of apologize, kind of a quick episode today. Kids got me sick, got the wife sick. It's kind of rough around my house these days, but got like an upper chest thing, short of breath. It's kind of, breezing through it, but, still doing it. So glad to be here. But regardless, leave a like, 5-star review, even though it's a short episode. Follow me on X at Campus Pigskin. But continuing on with Oregon here. Oregon Ducks. Last year you won the Big Ten, but you lost to Ohio State in the playoffs. They handled you pretty well. 10.5 is your over/under coming into the season. Floor around the 9-3 mark, ceiling 11-1. Not a super tough schedule at all, if you don't mind me saying. What's the expectation there? I would say obviously, continue the progress that you made last season with the title run. Don't get knocked out in your first playoff game by Ohio State like you did last year. Wasn't in the not the first round, but the quarterfinal. So your first game, go a little farther. Play in the semifinal, probably push, make the championship game. That's what we are really working and building towards there at Oregon. Key games are at Penn State, USC, and at Washington. New quarterback, coming in this year in Dante Moore is probably going to be the starter. Former 5-star. He did initially commit and played a season at UCLA, but transferred out and over to Oregon. Sat last year behind Dylan Gabriel and, is now primed for the starting role. Like I said, pretty easy schedule. What if we don't make the playoffs this year? So you go to Penn State, and I, preseason tend to favor Penn State in that game. Then you get USC at home, and, USC is what USC is. They're capable of biting someone. Are you going to be that team? It's possible, but, I kind of lean Oregon in this game, but, that's a dangerous game. And then, of course, at Washington, rivalry game, year 2 Jedfish there, kind of, not really sure what to expect yet. They've got a really dynamic quarterback, so Washington, underrated place to play, very tough place to play. You could end up, finding yourself going 10-2 or 9-3 this year, and are you making the playoffs if that happens? I'm not sure. Guess we'll have to find out, but it is, like I said, easy schedule, but if they don't make the playoffs, I wonder kind of what the, narrative around Oregon's going to be there. But forget Oregon is what Washington fans will say. Last year, Washington, you went 6-7 in Jedfish's first year. All things considered with the way, Kalen DeBoer exited in January, lost a lot of pieces of that team that, he had built up there. So 6-7, not quite the disastrous year you would have expected. I kind of expected worse, but not great either. Over/under 7.5. Expectations are fairly tempered there this year. I'd say the floor, however, I am kind of a believer in Washington, and a lot of that has to do with who's at the quarterback position. And Demond Williams, kind of an X factor, like I said, dynamic quarterback. Ceiling 10-2, that's best case scenario. Don't expect that at all. But floor of 8-4 after what happened last year and after all the turnover, I'd say that's pretty good. Key games, Ohio State, at Michigan, Illinois, Oregon. So if you lose those 4, can you win your other 8? I think you can. What are the expectations here? Progress under Jedfish, obviously, again, like a lot of other teams, be a factor in conference, but really show progress. I'd say that we want to feel confidence in the hire of Jedfish after Kalen DeBoer's departure to Alabama. But regardless, especially on the line of scrimmage, want to see some physicality there. But how do you perform in your swing games? Like a lot of teams, that's going to be the story of the season. How do you perform against Illinois? How do you perform at Michigan? How do you handle that road environment? Can you beat your rival at home? Wisconsin and UCLA as well. UCLA, that's a game that I could see, Washington still kind of being a team that they could lose to a team like UCLA, but then jump up and bite, Oregon. So I kind of see them as that team with that kind of range of variability, week in and week out. Like I said, Wisconsin as well. There a lot of, not turmoil, but, not a lot of stability there at Wisconsin either. They've had some turnover on the coaching staff, so things haven't really quite worked out with Luke Fickell there like we all expected. But regardless, I do have, high-ish hopes for Washington, and they're a team I'm excited to watch coming into this year. wrapping up the preview here with a quick top-down look of the conference. Got your tier 1, your favorites in the conference. I put Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan, probably in that upper echelon, tier 1 of the favorites to win the conference. Your contenders, best case scenario, say USC, Washington, Nebraska, probably more Nebraska than the other two, just because, year 3 of Matt Rule, it's, what everyone kind of focuses on whenever he's hired somewhere. Here are your dark horses. I've got Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin. I think if they're going to bite, they need to bite this season. But who am I buying? Who am I selling? I'll buy Illinois this year. Putting a lot of chips on the table for Penn State. Kind of leaning, in the favor of USC. I think they could be pretty good this year. I think we could see some progress there finally. But I am selling. I am dumping my stock in Indiana. Dumping stock in Wisconsin. I'm a kind of a half believer, half doubter of Nebraska. So if I'm selling stock, I'm going to sell it in Nebraska. Although I do think that we could have a good year there. But if I'm selling stock, if I'm handling that, not taking the risk, hitting the dump on Nebraska, could have 4 teams in the mix for the playoff. I think there's going to be less parity this season in the Big Ten, maybe some more competitive balance next year. Besides Luke Fickell, who else do we have on the hot seat in the conference? Does that conversation around Matt Rule start if we have a poor season this year? What's the temperature get amped up to on Lincoln Riley if we have another poor showing and you out at Southern Cal? Could see a lot of turnover in the next 2 years or so in the Big Ten at the coaching head coaching position. Conference title odds currently: Ohio State favored to win the conference at plus 190. Penn State not far behind at plus 220. Oregon, you're down in third place at plus 390, and Michigan, pretty steep fall down at plus 1,000, but in fourth place. If you're talking national title, Ohio State, you're plus 650, tied second with Georgia. Penn State, you are the solo third place team at plus 750, and Michigan, you're a solo 8th place team in national championship odds at plus 3,300. But regardless, that'll do it for the Big Ten preview. Like I said, sorry it's a bit of a short episode. Pretty under the weather, but pushing through as I must. But make sure you leave a review, follow the podcast so you don't miss a show. Follow me on X or Twitter, whatever your preferred name for that application is, at Campus Pigskin. But until next time, thanks for listening.